All right, it is 6:02, so I think I'm gonna get started, if that's all right with everybody. All right, thank you for joining us tonight. If you don't know me, my name is Brian O'Connell. I'm the superintendent here at the Litchfield School District. This is our team. We have representatives from Harriman and Harvey Construction here working with us. I'll have them introduce themselves real quick. And pop them.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Salwin. I am a principal and architect at Harriman. I lead our pre-K through 12 design studio.
Hi folks, I'm Jamie Willett with Harriman, also an architect and project manager for this project with Harriman.
Keith Kelly, Vice President and Director of Pre-Construction for Harvey Construction.
And I'm probably the last person, if you're in this room right now, that needs to tell you why we're here, and that is to look for some sort of long-term solution for Griffin Memorial School. And that the history here is that people have been looking to address some of the facility issues at that building for decades at this point. So when we came on board here, I came on board about a year and a half. I know that was one of the first tasks that we were going to have to look at. There was a failed bond vote for a new building a couple Marches ago. And some of all of the problems that we're trying to get fixed with that project kind of still exist, whether it's the facilities or space for our students and some other aspects, considerations related to that. So we've been going through a process here for the last about year and a half. The board set up a facilities improvement committee that's been meeting on a regular basis for close to 2 years now, after that failed vote in March of 24. And that committee kind of worked through some recommendations that allowed us to bring on Harriman to kind of help us try and figure out some solutions to GMS. So as part of this process, we've been trying to be as transparent as possible. This is our third community forum. They've each had slightly a different focus. Our first one was to kind of talk about design statement and what we're looking for from a project. The second was to kind of look at educational considerations was the main focus, because we're looking at utilizing the space here at Campbell versus just focusing solely on Griffin or some combination of things. And that brings us to our third forum here tonight, which is when we're going to go over some costs for these different options that we have. Cost is a huge part of this, right? I would love to build a $100 million school. We know that ain't happening. So cost is a huge, huge component of this project right here. So we're going to go over those costs here. This is still kind of the informational phase that we're going on right here. This is our third forum. I just saw these numbers about a week and a half ago for the first time, showed it to some of our advisory committee members just last week, and now we're showing it to the public right now. So we're vetting this information, we're figuring out what can and cannot work for our district, and figure out what our next steps are going to be. So we're going to show you costs tonight related to the two options that we talked about last time, focusing on a renovation addition at solely GMS, and then costs related to reconfiguring the grade levels at the school, bringing some students up here to the high school to make it a 7 through 12 school, the middle school in that example, 3 through 6, and then pre-K through 2 at GMS. And we're going to talk within that different parts of that point, right? One of the things that the Facilities Improvement Committee really wanted was to look at not only different options, but the different parts of those options to break down. So we can kind of, I won't say have a menu of options because everything's tied together, but we can see different aspects of the projects and what the costs are associated with that. What's the cost, for example, if we were to renovate the 60s portion of the building? What is the cost associated with renovating the 30s part of the building? What is the cost if we were to do an addition and do a demo? What is the cost of bringing kids over to CHS? All those different aspects is what we want to kind of look at. The next steps will be the board kind of taking this information. We have some board members here tonight. They obviously will get all of this information, and they're going to make a determination on what the next step is for us. They're here to learn as well as us, right? So they're going to hear this information, they're going to digest it, they're going to take their roles as elected officials and figure out what we should do next from that standpoint. The numbers we show you tonight does not necessarily mean that's the numbers that are going to be on the ballot in March. Could or could not. That's the work that we're doing right now. We're trying to be transparent in the process and show everyone as we see the information ourselves. So I know the numbers, I've seen them obviously, I know they're going to raise questions. We want to engage in that conversation with the community tonight. We will have a portion of the presentation dedicated to questions and to educate and have people understand the different aspects and different options that we kind of have at our fingerprints. So that's our goal for this evening. Hopefully we find it to be a beneficial forum this evening. We are taping this tonight just to give everyone a heads up so we can have it posted so others can view this at their leisure if they weren't able to make it this evening. So if you do come up for a comment later, I just want you to be aware that we are taping this. So otherwise, right now, I'm going to turn things over to Lisa, who's going to start with the beginning part of the presentation.
All right, I'm going to walk around the corners here. All right, so here's our agenda for this evening. Thank you, Brian, for the superintendent welcome and where we are in the process. As we jump in, I'm going to go over the project overview and schedule. If you read any of our other forums, some of this is going to be a little bit of repeat for you, but we just want to make sure everybody's at the same place. We'll do a summary of the 2 forums that we have conducted today. Ryan's going to walk us through the educational considerations as it relates to the options. We're going to go over some facility considerations, and then we're going to walk you through the different options that we were tasked with looking at, as well as the cost for those options. And then we'll have a time where we collect information or input from all of you about the options, and then we'll talk about next steps. All right, overview of project and schedule. So Harriman was brought on to really explore 2 options. The options had been determined when we were hired, and we were asked to look at 2 options. One would be, altogether, the options are supposed to solve for a solution to address the physical deficiencies, both operational and educational, of the current elementary school that balances the educational and financial needs of the Litchfield community. The 2 options we were asked to explore were to renovate and expand Griffin Memorial School for a pre-K through 4 program. The second option we were asked to look at was redistributing grades in the 3 buildings that you have in the district, and that would essentially have the high school be 7 through 12. We would have the middle school be 3, 4, 5, 6, and we have a pre-K 2 at GMS. And we had to identify what were the building needs and the renovations and what would that cost. So those are the 2 options that we will be going over this evening. So what has been the process thus far? We did a lot of data collection in the beginning. I think it was about 13, maybe 15 weeks ago we were hired. We did a bunch of data collection. We reviewed a lot of the existing information you guys have already. We looked at programming. So how is the existing school being utilized? What are those missing spaces? Which programs are in spaces that just aren't adequate for the program themselves? We looked at enrollment. We looked at capacity, and we did the design statement. Oops, is that one dead?
Fix it. If you want to use it.
All right, can you hear me now? All right, thank you. I think I got lost on data collection, but essentially we were collecting programming and visioning. We took the architecture and engineering team. Harriman is an integrated architecture and engineering firm. We walked through the building and identified any of those systems that were beyond their end of useful life or need to be modified for these options. We looked at enrollment analysis, we looked at capacity, and we looked at creating a design statement with the community. Then we started developing options, and we identified the scope for those options. Then we came back to the community, and we had another forum that went through all of that information. We then developed those options and have now estimated those options, and we're here tonight at the 3rd forum to report out on that information and collect input from all of you. This is just a graphic representation of some of the existing information within from your 3 existing schools. We also know that there is a survey that was done to collect feedback after the last project that was not successful at referendum. So we looked at that to understand what is really important to the community and what are some of the drivers we need to be very mindful of. There is a project website for anyone that's not aware. All of the information through this process is up on the website. You can see the QR code here as well as the address. So again, trying to keep everyone informed throughout and make it as transparent as possible. All right, on to the forums. So Forum 1 was on October 7th. Here we looked at the overall project schedule. We talked about best practices in educational design. One of the things that some folks aren't aware, there have been drastic changes in the delivery of education since several buildings have been built, especially GMS. We are seeing, GMS is kind of what we would refer to as a double-loaded corridor, where we have a hallway and we have classrooms on both sides of that corridor, or spaces on both sides of those corridors, or that corridor. It's also referred to as cells and bells, and what that means is post-World War II, we were really getting folks ready for factory work, and we were teaching a subject in one space, the bell would ring, you'd go to that next space and learn a different topic. We know that's not how we work today. We know that today we really pull from many different subjects, and we need to be able to create some of that cross-pollination. Yes, it's really important to learn those core subjects, but then have places where we can put it all together, as well as there has been a huge change in the type of programming that is required to be in schools, especially around special education since these buildings were built. And there's a lot more meeting students where they're at, so understanding how different students learn and creating spaces for that to happen. So that forum, the first one, was a lot on showing some of those changes, the evolution of educational spaces. And then doing an interactive exercise on crafting the design statement. You can see some of the participants, and the activity that we did was to help ground us in understanding what makes a school specific to Litchfield. So your school is going to be different than any of your neighboring schools because it's about your community, it's about your values. And so we wanted to hear what were the top words or phrases that really grounded a school in Litchfield to make it a community school. We then asked that folks come up with, we gave them all the printouts of the design patterns for future, for 21st century schools, and we asked them to pick the ones that they felt really highlighted what would be creating a school that was really grounded in place, as in grounded in the place of Litchfield, and where you see your future school, and then have them craft the design statement. So the words and phrases, we had everybody vote. We had a bunch of words and phrases and boards, and everyone got some stickers to vote. The top three that came up were safety. And I will say we heard this on every programming meeting we had with staff. Safety and security was the #1 priority throughout all of the programming we did. Meeting all students and staff needs, and cost effective. Those were the three words that we heard. And then the design patterns, which are, you can kind of see them up here. We looked at which ones came up over and over on the boards. And there were two that came up over and over. No surprise given the words that were chosen, but the first one was secure and welcoming entry. The second one was professional spaces, so really having those professional workspaces for the staff. And then you have a couple that came up on some of the other boards, so flexibility, flexible spaces, in furniture, gathering and collaboration hubs, and agile classrooms. We then asked that each group, we had broken into about 3 groups, come up with a design statement. And so really coming up with somewhat of a poetic statement that helped tie all this together for us. Because this is something, as we start to design a solution, we reflect back on and say, do these decisions align with what we heard from the community? And we take all of those and we blend them into one. And the statement that we came up with from all of the input was create a safe, comfortable, and inclusive school environment that promotes learning, creativity, collaboration, and curiosity, designed for long-term community value. So that was the summary of forum #1. Forum #2, we did an overview again of the project. We gave that summary on forum #1. We went over educational considerations and facility considerations, which you'll hear again tonight. And then we presented the options without cost. We got feedback from the community on those options. And this is the summary of the feedback we received. A preference to maintain grade configurations as they are today. Preserve educational resources, teachers, staff, sports programs, unified arts, and extracurricular activities. Building and site maintenance and safety upgrades, so address outdated infrastructure, energy efficiency, safety, and maintain playgrounds. Cost and feasibility concerns. Concern about cost of the options and long-term value of renovations to older part of buildings. Preference for option 1B. In that presentation, we showed option 1A, 1B, and option 2. Option 1A and 1B were essentially keeping pre-K4 at GMS and providing some version of a renovation expansion. And option 2 was the reconfiguration of grade levels, just for clarity. It was perceived to be safer, more flexible, and more cost-effective. Option 2 was viewed unfavorably. Need a long-term solution that allows for flexibility, so preference to keep grade configuration to allow the future enrollment changes, and concerned about disruption to learning. Concern about disruption during construction, fear of restricting resources if we reconfigure grades. And to build upon that, one of the other concerns was we'd be impacting multiple buildings with construction, and that would also impact learning. All right, so that's the overview of the forums, and I'll pass it over to Brian for educational considerations.
So I'm going to do this much faster than we did it last time because we talked about this at length. Well, I'll try.
Don't throw it this time.
I know, if you were here last time, I accidentally threw this halfway across the cap by total accident. So we'll see how this goes. So like we mentioned, current configuration would be pre-K through 4, 5 through 8, 9 through 12. We look at reconfiguring pre-K through 2, 3 through 6, and then 7 through 12. Some of the things we would be looking at: mix of general classroom and specialized space, where we would need renovations, such as the bathrooms throughout everything. If you were to go junior, senior high school, looking at the current class spaces, making sure we can get programs in those. We would be looking at some shared spaces for our unified arts and our electives courses, and sharing some classrooms instead of teachers having their own classroom sharing with each other. The educational models you're teaching in, an early ed model versus an elementary model. One of our favorite sayings in education is learning to read versus reading to learn. Once kids hit 3rd grade, there's kind of a shift in their reading abilities. So there's some, if you're in that pre-K through 2 school, for example, you're really doing that early education model where if you have a mix of grades, pre-K through 4, you're having more of a difference in progression through those. Both have their pros and cons related to that. If you had that upper elementary school, it would be an elementary versus a middle school than what we currently have. Not very few changing of classes, more of a single classroom structure, examining the unified offerings in that kind of middle school. And then with the junior high school, looking at different bell schedules, heterogeneous versus homogeneous classes, that would be level classes, non-credit classes versus credit classes. 7th and 8th graders would be non-credited, 9 through 12 would be credited, unified arts versus elective models. Again, these are just considerations, not passing judgment on any of it. And then our specialized learning spaces for general services, speech, OT, special education, and how we would do our case management model and transitions related to that. Big part of it would be social considerations, the age of the kids in the building. In this reconfigured part, you would have kids 4 through 8. That upper elementary would be 8 through 12. And then the junior high school would be 12 through 18-year-old students. How much you would mix and not mix the kids. Lunch is done, for example, at elementary right now, specifically by grade. Same thing at the middle school. You'd have to do you mix once you get up to high school. You would have to do some of those mixing if you had a junior high kind of model. And then bathrooms is a key component. How people, because that's a security thing. We don't have cameras in bathrooms, obviously. And so just being aware of who's sharing that bathroom, that private space, and what is the age of the individuals in that shared space. From a teaching standpoint, staffing standpoint, you'd have to factor in certifications. Certifications aren't necessarily clean. You can see everything. You can see K through 12 certifications. For example, my math teaching certification is 7 through 12, but you could have a 5 through 12 certification, a K through 8 certification. It all depends on the specific area and the individual. So kind of going through all of that, we don't fully match this reconfiguration if you move teacher to teacher to their respective buildings. About 10% of our staff doesn't have the certification to teach on paper what they would shift to. So that would take some work to kind of work through that. It's not unmanageable. You just got to work through it and stuff like that. Individual versus shared classrooms. I think I spoke to this last time. Right now, most of our teachers have their own classroom. Definitely in the junior high school model, teachers would have to share. I shared classrooms as a teacher. Still really good friends with the teacher I shared with, so there's pros to that. And then staffing needs may not be one-to-one. It's not as simple necessarily as translating as taking, hey, we're going to take one of the computers teachers or tech teachers at the middle school and also move that teacher up to the high school. We would have to figure out the perfect combination of all that type of stuff. Again, doing this really, really quick, you'd have to work through school start and end times. How would that play out? typically, like right now, the elementary starts 8:30-ish, 8:40-ish, give or take. Would you need to adjust the elementary, the upper elementary school? The middle school starts around 7:20-ish. Would you shift that to a later start time? And then all the bus runs kind of associated with that. Your drop-off, pickup models, your grading practices and report cards. Again, just considerations we'd have to do. And making sure we have the right size furniture for everybody. Making sure, the bathrooms are the right size, desks are the right size, chairs are the right size for the students in those buildings. Athletics and other co-curriculars would be a major part of this as well. There are very specific eligibility rules we have to follow. We would have to make sure we were figuring that out. And it could jeopardize possibly our athletic model for grades 5 and 6. Co-curriculars, again, how would you approach that? And then the SAU, if you're moving kids, essentially, it's not this simple, but if you're moving kids up here, you're likely taking the SAU out of the high school. They need a home, whether it's portables or the Ferries building or something like that. So that was about 50 minutes of a presentation from last time. I think I used to leave a couple minutes. So. And I didn't throw your foot there.
Appreciate that. All right, thank you, Brian. All right, overview of facility considerations. I'm going to let Jamie walk us through this one.
Okay, we analyzed the energy usage for each of the schools, and we break it out into a number called an EUI. It's kind of like miles per gallon per vehicle, but for a building. So it talks about the energy usage of each of the buildings. You can see that Griffin Memorial, based on the median baseline for the EUI, has a much higher EUI. The lower the EUI number, the better for a building. But at the middle school, you can kind of see that one's existing 26.14. Excuse me, 26.14 basis, and then Griffin was at 75.9. So you can kind of see there's a significant difference at Griffin Memorial, and Campbell High School was 42.2. GMS is greater than $1 more per square foot when compared to LMS and CHS. And LMS and CHS have some cooling in them. So what this slide is telling you is that Griffin Memorial School has significant lack of energy efficiency within it. Infrastructure and life cycle considerations. So this here shows all the different ages of the building construction for GMS. Ranges from 1930s to the left in the yellow box. And then you have some 1950s, some 1960s, 70s, 80s, all within those different components there in the different colors. The average age of some of those portions are 60, 70, or more years old. And when you're looking at the U.S. Department of Educational National Center for Education Statistics, according to Ornstein 1994, when a school is 20 to 30 years old, you're starting to see systems need to be replaced, the equipment's aging out. When it's between 30 and 40 years old, the original equipment should have already been replaced, including roof and electrical equipment. And then after 40 years, the building begins rapid deterioration. And after 60 years, most schools are abandoned. Without major renovations, these are statistics that Ornstein noted. So most of these portions are beyond 40 years old. So all of them are, if you're looking at those numbers. So 83 is the closest, that little addition of 83, that light blue box. When reviewing the building envelope, we had noted that several areas were a single wife CMU, so it's a concrete block, single wife. That's the component of the exterior wall system. No brick or insulation on it. So the red dashed line is those areas that we noted are just a single wide CMU. As you can imagine, just having a single CMU block is not very energy efficient. No insulation to help keep the weather going in and out. No air vapor barrier to keep moisture or other air coming through that building. Yeah, it's around an R2 or 3, and the standard exterior wall is a 21. So higher the number, the better. And then the dashed blue area indicates area with CMU, so that masonry block, that single white block with brick on it. No insulation still. There's no thermal protection other than that small portion of block and brick. At 1930s, we weren't sure, we couldn't find existing documents. It appeared like it is brick on block, but we don't have a firm knowledge on that. All right, program space and condition considerations. GMS, the top priority themes.
All right, I'll walk you through the programming. So we interviewed, or didn't interview, we had staff meetings with each of the schools, and we asked them what are their priorities for this project. At Griffin Memorial School, you can see the themes that came out: space, safety, heating, indoor air quality, address the traffic, staff spaces, and student spaces. At LMS, safety and security, healthy environment, spaces that support all learners / collaboration and age appropriate. CHS, safety and security, they asked that we prioritize GMS and appropriate learning environments. And one of the things that we noted in the 1960s portion of the building, this is where we saw a lot of the challenges with the existing building. We noticed cracking and settlement, especially in the upper right corner of where that rectangle is. In one of those classrooms in the upper right corner within the green box, there is heaving in the floor. You can physically see it is elevated in the floor itself. As we already talked about, the majority of the exterior wall doesn't have insulation. It's that single white CMU, which is part of the issue that you're seeing, and we're getting condensation because of that. And majority of classrooms in this area are undersized when compared to the New Hampshire Department of Education guidelines. And then building code considerations, GMS, existing square footage of the building and lack of firewalls would require fire sprinklers per the current International Building Code. Per the international existing building code, depending on the level of alteration, it would determine if you would be required to add sprinklers to bring the building up to code. And then per level 2 and 3 alteration, the IEBC does not require that we bring the current building up to the current energy codes as energy codes. Any new construction would be required to meet the current energy code. So just showing that there are different thresholds that will trigger that we are required to put sprinklers or not, and then what parts of it are required to meet the existing energy code and which are not. All right, so we're going to go over the options. I'm just going to step on the other side of the board here. So we are going to go through option 1A. 1A, and you're going to see different site plans for some of these options. They are slightly different. There's some nuances, but we're mostly going to focus on the building because that's where the big differences are in these options. Option 1A is a one-story addition on GMS. Option 1B is a two-story addition. It's going to be the major difference between those two. And then option 2 is where we start to look at the reconfiguration of grade levels. You are going to see the cost right off the bat. There is always a level of sticker shock, so I'm just prepping everyone for that. But these are the costs as we receive them from the contractor. Harvey got these costs. These costs came in from subcontractors. So they reached out to subcontractors to get these costs as to what it would be to build this project. And then there's a soft cost added on top of that, which is everything outside the hard construction itself. And that's how we get the total project. So option 1, hit the question.
What type of contract are you talking about here? Is this like a cost plus contract where it might be higher, or is it like firm fixed price where it's this will be the price and any additional costs will be paid for by the contractors?
It's a CM at risk. So that would be once we get to a guaranteed maximum price, which we're not there right now, we're still going through the estimating of options. That will be a cost that they would guarantee, and then anything beyond that would be at their
Okay,
risk.
so we're seeing an estimate and not the ceiling.
Correct. We are seeing an estimate at this time because we still haven't picked an option to further develop to refine those costs.
Okay.
So you're seeing where we're at this moment in time in the process.
Thank you.
Really good question. All right, so option 1A, the construction is about, I'm going to use round numbers, 27.6, 27.7 million. And typically there's a 25% soft cost on top of that. when I say soft cost, people just think it's just furniture. It's not. We're talking about any of the contingencies. So your construction contingency, an owner wants to have a certain construction contingency so that when we're building a building, we have a bucket of funds to pull from for anything that's unforeseen during construction. You have architectural engineering fees, you have permitting fees, you have typically a clerk of the works that's on site, you have construction testing costs, you have lawyer fees to review things, and there's a bunch of different categories that make up that 25%. There's also furniture, fixtures, equipment, and technology in that as well. So that's what the soft cost is. So for 1A right now, and again, this is where we're at in this process, is $34.6 million. So what is option 1A? This is the existing building. For anyone that isn't familiar with it, the bottom, the entrance, you can see main entrance right next to the gymnasium, and then the portables are in the upper right corner. This is the existing site, so looking at the different traffic patterns and number of doors. And then this is option 1A. What option 1A does is it removes the 1960s building. This is where we saw a lot of those considerations we pointed out before. So it takes that offline and replaces it with an addition. That addition also accounts for any of the missing program and or undersized. Remember the 1960s, all the classrooms were undersized. And we also have, what we didn't point out is there's a bunch of programs within the existing building that are not the adequate size for the program, especially around the special education. So what this does, it's kind of hard without a pointer. Let me see if I can use my computer here. This becomes the main entrance right here. This becomes admin and nurse. We now have the gymnasium here, library, music, and cafeteria. We have along the bottom here, pre-K and kinder. And then we have special education, art over here, and then a one-story addition here that has mostly classroom, grade level classrooms, as well as some collaboration space for more of those 21st century spaces. What it also does is some of those collaboration spaces are sized as the size of classrooms. So if you see a bubble come through where you have an increased number of students in a grade level, you can absorb that in those locations. But this is essentially option 1A. It leaves the 1930s building as is, and we are doing system replacement within this building. I'll go over the scope of work here in a minute. These are site plans or different configurations for separate bus and car drop-off, as well as one of the things that you can do when you take the 1960s portion of the building off is we now can get a fire lane all the way around this building. Similar, a little bit different approach to the drop-off in these areas. And then the scope of work. So option 1A, same with option 1B. There's no scope at LMS or CHS. In the site, we have the new configuration, as I pointed out on the plan, as well as many of the other things you see here. I'm not going to read through all of these. Can everybody see this all the way in the back? Okay, perfect. The GMS building, we have, one thing I do want to point out in the site plan, we are updating and replacing site lighting. We were there for the last community forum. It is a very, very dark site. So I want to make sure that that was pointed out. As well as other things that our civil engineer pointed out on the site. These are being reconfigured and updated. One of the things to keep in mind, there was a previous report that was done on-site, in-site. That report looked at replacing things in kind, not necessarily making modifications and or bringing things up to code. So some of these address doing both of those things. GMS building, we have the one-story addition, or the one-story, addition. New secure entry and administration addition and renovation. We moved the main entrance to have better sight lines. One of the, I'm going to start coughing on the microphone now, hold on. One of the things from a safety and security standpoint is you want to make sure that the people at the admin can see out onto the site without obstructing their view. They also need to see into the building. By moving it to the other side of the gymnasium, the gym was no longer blocking their line of sight out onto their drives. And we were able to get it more centrally located near more of the public spaces, so we can really start to think about how to block off public space versus classroom space for community use. We have renovations to provide, just like I said, those separate classrooms and public area. Renovation for pre-K and kindergarten classrooms. These will all have toilets in those spaces, which is really important to those programs. Relocating and right-sizing special education spaces. Removing the 1960s addition. Updated finishes. Necessary ADA upgrades. Roof replacement. In that roof replacement, we're not only replacing the membrane, we're actually increasing the insulation because that is not adequate. And then window and door replacement, replacement of mechanical systems, replacement of plumbing systems, and replacement of electrical systems. And you'll see all the detail below. All right, option 1B, this is that 2-story addition. Pretty much it's the same as 1A, except the addition is now 2 stories. This is slightly more in cost. So total construction cost is about $28.3 million. Total project cost with using the 25% soft cost at this time is 35. We'll call it 35.4 for rounding up. The reason we wanted to look at a 2-story addition is because of the existing site constraints. So what this does is it preserves more of the existing site for play area, site circulation, and it also sets you up better in the future. If you ever have to put another addition onto this building, you have more site space to be able to do that than the 1-story. What it does do is we can only put certain grades on that 2nd story per code. The pre-K, kinder, and first have to be on the 1st floor. They have to be on the exit of level discharge, or the level of exit discharge. I said that backwards. So that means that the older grades would be upstairs. So this essentially is, everything is the same as 1A except for that addition. You can see that we have in this one 1st and 2nd year, we have some special education. Anywhere where it says aux and it's a gray, that means it's either mechanical space, restrooms, electrical spaces, teledata space, things that really are needed to make the building function. Same site plans as the other options, so I'm going to click through these pretty quick. Again, very similar as 1A, except for that 2-story addition.
This 2-story would have an elevator and some stairs too.
Yep, that's a good point, Jamie. So one of the trade-offs you have with the 2 stories, now you have to add an elevator and 2 stairs. So that's where a lot of the cost is coming in. However, you are having more site space. Typically, the 2-story is more energy efficient as well because there's less roof area. Option 2. So this is where we start looking at reconfiguring the high school and GMS to be able to move the grade levels around. This is coming in at 30.9, almost 31 million in construction, or 38.7 in total project cost. This is your existing high school. What we looked at is ways to which we could reconfigure or take things out of this building to be able to get the 7th grade and 8th grade into this building. And as Brian mentioned, it was the SAU was the easiest thing to move out. So you'll see in this next option here, this was the existing, where we have SAU here, a bunch of the allied arts programs here, classroom and special education upstairs. In the rework, what we did is we moved the nurses area to this location here, which freed up space next to the admin. We moved the SAU out of the building. We were able to get a community down here for the 7th grade, as well as some conference rooms into the library space because they had been relocated from spaces. You'll see that we've renovated upstairs as well as they're needed for the school themselves. And then we had to think about restrooms specifically for the 7th and 8th graders, really trying to kind of create a 7th and 8th grade zone within the high school. On the 2nd floor, we were able to move some of these spaces, and as Brian mentioned, we went from every teacher having a classroom to sharing classrooms. So we have some administration spaces to where they can go during their planning periods or periods when they're not in their classroom. And then we were able to get an 8th grade, call it zone or neighborhood, on that 2nd story. So quite a bit of renovation in this area, as well as some other areas throughout the school. So existing GMS. Now we are taking this to pre-K through 2. So the only addition in this is the relocation of the admin and the spaces that were needed for the administration so that we could rework this area for some of the special education programming that was needed. So you have the main entrance coming in here. Pretty much majority of this is just like the other options that you saw in 1A. And then in the 1960s, we have done renovation of these spaces, including the exterior wall, providing insulation in that exterior wall, and then you have your classrooms and special education in here. And then this option looks at putting the SAU in this area, which is the 1930s building. That would be a decrease in square footage from what the SAU has in the high school right now, just for consideration. And then the site plan. So the major difference with the site plan is we can no longer get that emergency egress, emergency path all the way around the school. Essentially, we would provide parking here for the 1930s building that becomes the SAU. And then we would have a road that comes over here into what we call a hammerhead so that a car or a truck can turn around and come back out.
The SAU would need an elevator, ADA ramps, and everything for ADA compliance.
I think we have that on the scope section.
Oh,
Similar, just looking at slightly different bus drop-off here. So when we get to the scope, here we have, starting with LMS, we didn't show it on here, but you would need a new playground with the grade levels that are going to that location. CHS, we talked about the renovations that you're seeing listed up there. Just looking to see if there's anything different. I think we covered most of those. We would have to do some updates to existing systems to support the work that we showed in that location. GMS portables would be removed. The SAU would be housed in the 1930s building. I guess it isn't on here, but what Jamie was mentioning is there's a lot of work that has to happen in that 1930s building. We need to provide an elevator. We need ADA access to that building as well as within that building. GMS site, pretty similar to 1A and 1B, and then the existing building itself, more renovation in this scheme, especially around the 1960s addition, exterior facade, interior finishes for wall, addressing the floor and wall issues and systems, and then the renovations of the 1930s building. Beyond that, it's a lot of the similar things that you saw in 1A and 1B. So, the preliminary cost, I'm going to skip to this slide for just a second. This shows you all of the costs together. I just show total project here. We have 1A at 34.6, 1B at 35.4 on the roundup, and 2 at 38.7. Something to keep in mind is we did look at the square footage. One of the things to think about in option 2, there is 62,000 square feet of renovations. We're touching a lot of area within existing buildings. And also think that we're at 2 buildings now, so we now have mobilization at 2 locations, things happening simultaneously at 2 locations. So those are some of the differences. But the other thing we looked at was starting to kind of, and this is a little hard to read, so I apologize, started to look at kind of categories within each of these options, understanding that we need to, from here, really start to think about how can we get these costs down? How are ways that we can look at these in different lights? So option 1A, we start looking at, okay, what are we talking about for additions? The major addition, that 1-story addition with new systems. We're going to look at the total project cost just to simplify the numbers here. We're talking about, $14.4 million for that addition in 1A. In 1B, I'm going to go down here for a second. We're talking about 15.1, 15.2 for that addition. We go back and we look at the renovation with replacement of systems and the relocation of that secure entrance. And that's about, in both of those options, 1A and 1B, total project cost just over $17 million. And then we look at, okay, well, what's the impact of the site? And the site in those two options, 1A and 1B, is about 3.1 million, we'll call it 3.15. So that allows us to start thinking about where are these areas that we're starting to see where we're investing the money. Are there areas that maybe we can think about paring back or things like that? So they're all broken down that way. Same for 1B. 2A, obviously we're doing a little bit different scopes. We're broken down differently. At the high school, we looked at the renovation number, pretty much about $5 million for renovating the high school. GMS renovation, and this is looking at the building renovation with replacement of systems and secure entrance. That's about 16.7 million. And then we have the 1960s renovation broken out with replacement of systems. That's about 9.79, well, 9.8 million. And then we have the renovations of the 1930s. That's about 3.5. And then we have site work and the rework on this option is about almost 3.9 million. So that starts to show you how we're breaking out those different areas of the building, or the options, I should say. So considerations, this, as mentioned by Ryan, this is currently where we're at. And we are continuing to work towards a solution. So we're exploring ways to lower the cost. We may consider different approaches to the options. Things to keep in mind, the cost of waiting. There are tangible and intangible costs, right, or considerations. The tangible is escalation. So if we wait, we see increase in cost for construction. The intangible is continue to have building issues. We have disruptions to learning. You may lose some momentum on the project and maybe some engagement. Something to keep in mind is we then looked at, okay, 2024, there was I believe, and these are round numbers, so they're not going to be exact, but we didn't go back and estimate your previous project. We just took the total that we were given, which is about $44 million. And not including land procurement, built on the same schedule as the options that we put out today. You add about 5% to get from where it was to today's dollars, another 4% of escalation to get it to where it would bid out for construction. That 44 million on this same schedule is now 48 million. So just kind of putting that in context that unfortunately nothing's cheaper than it is today to really consider building an option. But we know that this is real money. This is, so we need to come up with a solution that everybody can get behind. That being said, I know that's a lot to digest. So our next topic here is really feedback on these options. We're going to put a mic up here. I'm also going to put up a QR code so that those that don't want to come up to the mic can go to the QR code or go to your phone and go to that website and enter that number and type in some of your feedback or considerations or just what's on your mind. We really want to hear from folks, what your thoughts are, anything you want to share with us, things for us to consider as we're moving forward. So we welcome you to come up. We welcome you to log in online. This is all anonymous, so if you don't want to be associated with a comment, by all means, speak up there.
Hi, Tim Allen. So you've shown us some really nice design options, and when I go to purchase something for myself and my family, or make a home upgrade, I always like to do the design shopping and see the art of the possible. But then my next step is to look at my own budget and what I can afford, and I feel like that's missing from this presentation. You haven't pulled the town on what the town is willing to pay, because that's a key limitation. And that needs to temper our design options. After we look at the art of the possible, you need to then restrict it based on what you can actually afford. And if the town says, we're only willing to pay $15 million, then what is the design space then? Because these options all go out the window at that point. And you really need to take a look at what is affordable.
I think that's a very good point. So we did do a survey at the beginning of this whole process, and I know we didn't specifically ask for a dollar amount about that survey. We asked for people to summarize many aspects of that. Is what was the most important aspects as we looked at this work? Was it cost? Was it the educational needs, or some sort of balance between the two? And there was responses all over the place for that. Some people think the educational needs should take the highest priority over anything. Some people think the cost is the highest priority. Some think we should weigh both as equally as we can. So we tried to, as we've gone through this process, try to mimic that. All right, what are our educational needs? What are our facility needs? Where is this going to take us? I think, I'll just speak for myself. Like when I saw these numbers, and I've shared this with Harriman and with Harvey, I was a little bummed out because they're high, right? Like I was hoping to have lower numbers and something different that we could present. But I do feel this is part of the process, right? Here we did a list of everything we needed from a facility and educational need, trying to find the right balance of what we needed, not what we wanted, not anything extreme, and where did that get us from a price point? And this is where it got us from a price point. This may not be the price point for us, so now the next step is to go back and say, like, okay, if we're looking at dollar amounts, what we can work with here, what can we get for 15? What can we get for 20? What can we get for 25? So on and so forth. So we know what we're working with. This is the part of the process that we want to be transparent about. We're working through the steps. We want people to see what we're seeing as we're going through the process, so people are educated to what we're going through.
Hi, Ray Lamar. Correct me if I'm wrong, but over a quarter century ago when this school was approved, my understanding of what the core was built for 1,000 students and classrooms for 600, and they could add on that wing for the additional classrooms. Was that considered?
Yeah, so core would be your gym areas, your cafeterias, your auditorium, here and this. And we're not, this proposal doesn't touch any of those areas
Right.
because those areas can handle those additional kids. I think when you look at those projections, you were looking at kids 9 through 12, right? So this is where, like, when you add essentially extra classes, like, it's not just extra students, it's extra classes, right? So if you're teaching 7th grade math, right, you're not just putting more kids into your existing high school classes like Algebra 1, Algebra 2, so on and so forth. You need to create an additional 7th grade section, additional 8th grade section. Across the grade, the numbers that we have, we're creating about 4 of those sections each, and they need their own classrooms. This building, I think at its highest was at like 550, 560. It was probably crowded, but you probably were fine, you know, like, because the school was built for that. But that was all in grades 9 through 12, so you could have classes that were in that 24, 25, probably 26 range. You just can't put the kids together. Like, you can't put that 7th grade kid in that Algebra 2 class. You got to still keep them separate. But the core can handle the numbers. Like, we're not looking to adjust the CAF or the gym or any of that.
Right, but what about the additional wing, to finish off the quad? Was that
I mean, we did not do that for this. There are existing plans for that. I think then you're like we just didn't pursue that. My gut reaction is that's just an excess of space. Like, you're not, like.
But then you could separate the younger kids from high school kids.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do with this proposal.
Right.
But I think it's still an additional cost here.
Well,
Yeah.
So nobody considered how much that would cost. Move the 6 through 8 up here. Then what's the capacity of the middle school?
About what it is, which is, I would say probably you're reaching a capacity of about 400 kids once you factor in all the adults. So I think you're under it right now with what you have, but I wouldn't push it too far much over there.
So there's no consideration of doing that, moving all the GMS to the middle school.
Yeah, we tried
and
to
then
just,
get rid of.
I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of variations of like what we could do. We try to focus on things like with this option we put up here for CHS. I don't know if you can go back to that slide, Lisa. We were trying to maximize our time with Harriman and Harvey, and what can we pull apart for cost that allow us to start to piece different things together. No, the summary of the prices. Yeah, this. So when we looked at this building at the bottom one, the option 2 here, like a renovation, okay, $5 million. Maybe you can add the extra wing for more or less than that. I don't know. But like if you were to keep the 60s building and keep a part of CHS, just dealing with that secure entrance, there's like 25 million for costs here, right? Like, is that 5 million to renovate? If it's 3 million to add an extra wing, is it 5 million? Like, is that substantial enough to make a difference? Maybe, maybe not. But we have to focus on something. We wanted different aspects and different pieces that we could piece together.
Was any consideration on moving the 7th and 8th graders here and expanding middle school so you could get rid of GMS?
I think our concern is this town just put $8, $9, $10 million just into that building. You're pretty landlocked in LMS right now. You got the cul-de-sacs around it. I think we considered it, we did not go very far down the road with it because it seems pretty tight in the space where it is that you're trying to add up to that point, at least 2, maybe 3 grades there.
There's not a lot of parking at LMS.
No, I mean, that whole parking lot's gonna have to get redone anyways, right, separate from any of this discussion, and that's not gonna be cheap.
Could it be done in like 2 stages, like the high school first and then Memorial?
I think that's where our next steps are, right? Like now that we've seen this pricing here, where does this take us next, right? Do we do this in phases? Do we just do this part of it? Do we take care of this part? I think that's why we like this, where it's broken down into different sections. All right, we can identify that renovating the 60s part of that building is gonna cost close to $10 million, right? Like, so we can do that section, if we chose to, like we would talk about this, figure out what it is. But trying to get those different sections at different prices, that kind of menu, and then piecing together what we can handle at the district. And
Though I had a few questions I was hoping you all might know the answers to, or if not, be able to find them. I'm curious with our different options, what our 10, 20, 30-year maintenance costs are projected to be, projected attendance, what's the population look like? It feels like we're starting to get a lot more families in town, and so what are we looking at? Again, it's going to be a guess either way. And then lastly, how much time are we buying with the renovation? A renovation is a renovation. That means you're leaving other stuff up. So I'm curious how much time in each of these proposals with the renovations that we're doing are we buying?
all right, I'm gonna try to do parts of those, but I'm gonna turn them. I'm gonna start with the enrollment one first, because I feel most confident talking about that, not that there's a confident answer. So we can do enrollment projections outright, and when we do enrollment projections out, we did our own internal ones, and we had Harriman work with NESDEC, correct?
Yep.
To create them, and they're very similar. So like we're using the same methodology, because there's only so much you can use, and that is birth rates, how much birth rates there are in town. So if you look at birth rates in Litchfield, we are gonna, probably 2 years from now, well, 1 year from now, not this upcoming kindergarten class, but 2 away, you're gonna start to see a little bump. And then the year after that, another bump, and it's COVID, right? People were in their houses, those kids are coming of school age, they're gonna, you can see the birth rate spike, and then, yeah. Now, you do see the birth rates come back down to more traditional, well, for this town, more traditional birth rates after that, right? We have a cap about how much information we have, because it's only 2025, obviously. So we anticipate that little bump, but then coming back to about where we are right now. But that doesn't necessarily factor into the demographics. So we have asked for a demographic study that factors in some of the new construction plans in town. We haven't seen we have seen a little, but not a ton of students move into the new developments that are enrolled in our schools yet, right? That could be because they're still newer, right? That could be that they're just not going to be filled with families sending kids to schools. Who knows where it is? It's pretty early to kind of tell where that is, We anticipate there being kids there, but will it be enough to make a huge swing in our enrollment? We're just not sure from that point. So that's where we are from enrollment. So we can guess out probably like 4 or 5 years, and we can keep going after it, but then it becomes very just it's guesswork after that. So that was the second part. What was the first part?
CIP.
CIP.
What does it look like for 10, 20, 30 years?
Yeah.
Projections, and how much time do we buy with the renovation?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to talk about LMS and CHS first for CIP. So we worked with this group on Insight, who did a report on all 3 schools, the current conditions of the schools, and what it would take to maintain current facilities in those schools. GMS is kind of over here because we're talking about this stuff over there. But with LMS and CHS, we priced out what the plans would be to keep those schools going. So LMS, you just had significant kind of work done on it, especially the systems. Most of those costs shouldn't show back up again until 20 to 30 years because you just did that lifespans of 20 to 30 years. CHS, you're in year 25, 26 right now in this building. You're going to see systems starting to be replaced in the next 5, 6, 7 years, right? Like we have projected out the roof in 2031, whether that's when we actually do it, that's another question, but that would be the 30-year mark on the roof. That would be when we kind of circle for replacing here. And then other things, if we're taking the roof off, touching the HVAC and other systems over there. So we've developed those costs For LMS and CHS for the district, they're public, they're on our website, I don't remember them all. We try to average about $125,000 worth of maintenance and repairs for those two buildings in our budget. And then when we have those spikes, like for the roof here, using our reserve funds or possibly, bonds down the road and stuff to take care of those things. GMS, our hope, and I say hope because we'll see where this process takes us, right? If we were to do everything in say like option 1B here, right? We're looking at, we're good for a long time, right? 20, 30 years down the road, that would be the idea behind it. Sure, you're gonna have things break because things just break, but major systems are gonna last for a long time. The roof is gonna last 30 years. So like if you replace that roof as part of that, we're not touching that roof until way down the road. That's the idea behind doing a significant project around that. If you start to break this up into pieces, you could have different time frames when different things need to be replaced, right? So you just work with the professionals, what is the life expectancy for the systems, and then you start matching it up from a budgetary standpoint. But we have that capital plan in place for the district now. For the other two schools, we're just waiting to figure out what direction we're headed for GMS to complete it for GMS at this point. And then the third thing, I think that's a Lisa question, so I'll answer.
Yes, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, your other question was how much time do we buy with renovations?
Right.
Yeah, so it depends on the scope of the renovation, but to Brian's point, option 1A, for example, we're looking at replacing the major systems because they're at the end of their life expectancy, the roof, putting insulation on the walls, all of those things we're doing, we're addressing a lot of those items. And so you're not replacing the structure, but you are doing major renovations. And we saw that comes up about every 40 years. So some of those systems will have to be replaced at the 20-year, some at the 30, some at that 40-year mark. So depending on the system itself, you're buying decades. And then, but say, I mean, even with the new building, some of those systems are going to be on that same, the mechanical system's only going to last, depending on what it is, 15 to 25 years, maybe 30, depending on what the system is. So you are buying decades of time. And by doing it all at once, you're able to kind of reset the clock on that building to then come up with a more systematic approach and budget to replace those systems as you go.
So fewer concerns around structure, foundation, you're not worried about overall.
Yeah, the areas that we had the most, I'll say, pause was that 1960s. We're not doing anything in the 30s, except for the renovation for the SAU on option 2. In option 1A, we were looking at removing the 1960s because you're seeing some of that settlement, you're seeing some of the heaving. There's more unknowns given what we're seeing happening there, which is why we looked at the addition for those options.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for letting me know.
How are you?
Good, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Kendra Dupuy. Quick question on timelines in terms, so the renovations all look great, but how long do we think those may take from when we get the vote that's yes to when kids are moving in?
So with any renovation, particularly for an active school, we have to create what's called swing space, generate space to be able to move the kids, faculty, and staff to their needs while we do those renovations. 1A and 1B durations are right now scheduled to be about 27 months. And then 2 would be 34 months because of the amount of area that we touched. To what they said indicated, there's a 62,000 square feet worth of space to renovate. With that being said, is that the durations are really driven by creating that space work area without impacting the function of the school. We have a long track record. We already have a long track record of doing this. Just finished a multi-phase renovation in Nashua. That one is 6 phases over almost 3 years as well. There is an impact to that to the users, obviously. We do our best to separate it as best we can, but any renovation of any school is going to have that impact. And even in your house, you think about what that looks like. But we're basically between 27 and 34 months. And that's part of the costs that are differentiated in those two estimates as well, is that we're on site longer. we're mobilizing at different locations, so that there's a cost associated with that. So that's what you'll also see in those numbers that are reflected.
And when you say swing space, do you mean potentially extra portables or something like that for the kids to continue?
Yeah, right now, we're actually creating the space within the existing footprint for the most part. The portables are there, we're gonna use them if we can. Obviously, there's an intrinsic value associated with having the existing portables. In the option two, we're actually creating the space for GMS in the high school first. So there's a bit of generating, let the students be where they are so that we can create the space for 7th and 8th grade to move over. And then that would allow free up space to be able to do the renovations of GMS. So it's a combination of the two, and obviously the plan will be developed 17 times between now and when we do it officially, but the reality is that that's something that we evaluate because we're on board and part of it.
I do just want to add something to the duration. So that's the construction duration. Add 1 year of design time. So when you get the approval, let's say you have a successful referendum, it's typically a year of design, 6 months of design development, 6 months of construction documents. Then we hand it over to Harvey to build it. So just add a year or two.
So we're about 3 years.
Yeah, plus or minus.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Lisa, I wonder if I should answer some of the questions that came up here. We lost a couple of the questions up there, so I'll try to do this.
I can scroll down.
Oh, okay. But just while, and please feel free to come up here, but just so we don't lose questions that are up here. I saw something about building aid from the state, and whether or not there's any consideration towards it for this project. There's no building aid. There's just not. It's not in the biannual budget from the state standpoint. So it's at least 2 years out at the earliest where building aid will be rewarded to schools already on the list. And if I'm being completely honest, I don't see building aid being added back to the state budget for a significant amount of time. That's just my gut instinct, but I'm very happy to be wrong on that. I think one of the challenges is that one of the projects in front of us is the Concord Middle School project, which is going to be a $100 million project. It's ahead of us on the building aid list. So even if the building aid gets reinstated into the New Hampshire budget, they're going to have to take care of that project first because it did get approved by their city. So they're ahead of us. So if building aid becomes available, we will certainly pursue it, 100%. But we're working under the kind of guidelines that it's not going to be available to us. Is there any consideration of combining facilities in 2 locations? You know, we haven't priced that out just because we haven't priced everything out. And I think it's figuring out where those 2 locations would be. If you're looking at current school district property, I would assume you would tear down GMS, I guess, make the middle school the elementary school, and then make here possibly even 6 through 12 school at that point, 5 through 12 school at that point, whatever the combination is that would make that kind of work. And you're probably adding significant cost to this building to bring up multiple grades up here. I think if you're starting fresh as a town, that might be a good conversation to kind of have. Would it look possible to have two schools? But I don't know if that's the right thing right now. I don't know if it is or it isn't. Just we haven't priced that option. I would say of these 3, 1B gives you the most growth because of the second floor. There's some additional space there.
Excuse me?
Yep.
Hold to the mic so
Yeah, I can pause here.
Hi, Margaret Batchelor, Horizon Drive, Litchfield. I'm the one that asked the question about the other buildings, and I'm assuming, the other facilities, I'm assuming that where the high school is it landlocked that you can't build another elementary school there?
Well, yes, in the sense that we're utilizing pretty much all the property on this property.
Okay.
Now, what we're utilizing for is field space, right? So like, if you were to build, say, hypothetically, I don't even know if it would fit, but like where the football field is, right? Like if you were to turn that into an elementary school and back where the softball field is, right? Like we own that property, we could build that there. But we would then need to figure out a place where we're gonna play football, which is not like insurmountable, right? Like you just gotta find that field space. So like what are you kind of replacing what that is? Like we have a lot of property on this property, right? But it's used in some capacity for the most part, but that doesn't mean we can't change the purpose of what's going on.
Right, well, because it seems like we've got 3 buildings, one is pretty much in the dumper, needs replacement, maybe raising. You've got another one that's landlocked, Fisher LMS is landlocked, and it needs improvements, or will need more improvements soon. And then you've got the high school here, which has land, and land costs money. And I just wondered if you had considered that in your options.
Yeah, we haven't talked about moving the elementary onto this footprint somewhere, you know. I think you're looking at then a totally new school, right?
Yeah.
Which was priced out previously like that. I wasn't here for the previous proposal, but that was priced out on school property, right? Like it was on the baseball and softball field on the GMS site right now. So I would imagine, again, I know there's design elements of that maybe you would move away from if you were to pursue a new building, but like you're gonna have a significant cost there as well, right? Even with the property.
I'm just figuring out what I can afford to pay for.
Yeah,
Are we in our budget, or are we dreaming pie in the sky here, or are we doing something we can really afford?
yeah, and I think that's what we're trying to figure out the right answer for. None of it, we're not committed to any of this. This is still educational, right? And just trying to get people to understand the different aspects and different sections. Like it was really telling for me personally to see that 70 or 60 section of the building was going to cost $7.5 million to really rent it, right? Like just that one subsection is a significant amount. Like I did not expect that, but walking through it with them, I understand where that cost is, right? So what can we figure out the right combination of pieces for the community that allows us to do something, right? Because we can't necessarily continue in the current direction that we're headed, so, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Do you want me to scroll down?
Yeah. Please come up, I'll pause if anyone comes up. I'll keep going here. I think this is just commenting on general, so if you want to kind of go back up. All right, want to stop there?
Yep.
Options 1A and 1B result in existing portions of the building which are to be retained, be completely refreshed, or other elements that remain untouched. I'll let you speak a little bit more, but my understanding is that the vast majority, except for maybe like a cafeteria or the gym, would be touched, but the classroom spaces would be touched, sorry, excuse me.
So majority of that building would be touched and, well, actually, we should take that back. The whole building will be touched in some capacity. So systems are being replaced throughout that building. So when we say systems, we're talking about electrical, mechanical, things like that. We're doing very little upgrades in the cafeteria and gymnasium. We might be replacing the flooring or something like that, but very, very little work being done there. Where we're doing a lot of the work would be in areas like the reconfiguration of spaces, or turning different spaces into different grade level spaces that may require restrooms that they may not have right now. So we are trying to be very mindful of only impacting where we have to, but also knowing that some of those systems or materials are at the end of their useful life. And when you're in there, it's the easiest time to have a contractor do it at that time, and is least costly as well. So hopefully that answers the question.
1A and 1B do not touch the 1930s.
That's a good point. 1A and 1B do not touch the 1930s, and obviously remove the 1960s.
Janet O'Berty. I think I have a couple concerns. I think I love 1B. I think that's the way to go. I think that's putting a two-story addition on Griffin, what we should be doing. I'm super concerned though, because tax rate just went way up, and I know a lot of people in town are not gonna be voting for a new addition or anything, and that's what really concerns me, because we've been going through this for years. I've lived in town for like 39 years almost, so I've seen the building aid when it was available and we didn't vote for a school, and I've seen the building aid not available and no one still votes for a school. So I guess my concern is that question, are there backup plans for voting failure? Because I'm really afraid unless we get out and educate the whole community, and I look at the numbers here, there's not that many people here. And a friend of mine who works in, well, doesn't work in town, but she knew nothing about it. So I think publicity needs to be really a lot there needs to be more publicity on this, and we need to have some sort of a backup plan, because that's gonna be a really big issue.
Yeah, I think, you know, if we put something to vote and it doesn't pass in March, we're gonna learn from that experience and try to grow from that experience, right? Do our work to figure out why it didn't pass. If, just like we did when the new building passed, or it didn't pass, we would be here for that. If the new building did not pass back in 2024, that facilities committee came together, they surveyed the community, they tried to do work, they tried to figure out what was the reason why that didn't pass, and that's why we're here looking at renovations rather than a new build. Because what we heard is that that was too expensive, and that a new building was not going to be the answer for this community. Utilize some of the existing spaces, look at reconfiguration options, looking at renovating the building, figuring out the different pricing for the different aspects of it, and come back to us with it. So that's why we're here, because we're trying to follow that lead. If we go to vote in March on a project and it fails, we'll be back to kind of, I won't necessarily say square one, but we'll be back and trying to figure out what didn't work about that proposal. The needs of that school are not going to go away. The facility needs of that building are not going to go away. We're going to continue to kind of figure out the best we can. We're going to open up school. The kids are going to go. They got to go until they can't. Like if for some reason that building just stopped being usable. But we'll take stock of where we're at. If we're one vote shy, then that might just be like, all right, let's educate a little better. If we're way low on the percentage, all right, this wasn't the answer. But where are we at in March if that's the standpoint that we're at?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think this question was asked up higher, but I wanted to bring it up as we talk about the potential backup plan or failure of that. How close is Griffin to being condemned? Just given all of what I have heard tonight and from friends in the neighborhood.
I don't think that the state's not going to condemn the building. So we went through a facility, every 5 years you have to have your facility examined to make sure that you can open school, right? We went through that process with all 3 of our buildings last year. While the person came in and was concerned about the state of the building, he's like, you're not going to condemn, we don't condemn schools, right? Like, so like that, I don't think that outcome is going to happen. I think the more worrisome fear is that there's some sort of significant damage that's going to cost us millions and millions of dollars. It's not our school district, but it's a different school district. Just to give you an example, Merrimack Valley had the roof collapsing on one of their schools, right? So that was a $2.5 million at least expense that they didn't plan for, that they had to replace and shut down school and change things around and go from there, right? Like, I hope our roof's not collapsing tomorrow, but it's also not like the nicest building in the world, if we're just being brutally honest. So it's always a fear, right, of what we're going to do. And then you got to pivot if that is. So I don't think we're at a point where the state's going to come in. I mean, there's a little humor to the evening. Last fall, for example, in one of the Newport schools, they found 1,000 bats. That didn't shut down school. So I don't think we're in a point where they're going to shut down schools and not allow kids to attend and stuff like that. But like, we got to figure out what we want for our kids. Like that building, we've done work there. We replaced HVAC in the portables, this fall. Like, and that's a tough pill to swallow, that you're replacing an HVAC system in a portable, right? That's how long it's been. Some of the siding, the stuff on the side of the building there that you had a bird's nest in there, like in critters and other things like that. That's tough to swallow, but I don't know if we're like condemnable yet. I think we're far away from there, thankful.
And then just one, sorry, I have some more questions today. You mentioned the 60s portion of the building is what we'd be working on. Does that mean that the 60s part of the building was worse off than the 30s? Nope. I've never been there, so.
Yeah, we're not using the 30s, so we try to limit looking at that, right? Like, just because we're not using it for classes or for anything like that.
Okay.
I think if it's smaller, right, and when they look to renovate it from an SAU standpoint, they priced it out at like $30-something million. And that's to get it workable for like an office space.
So right now it's not being used at all?
Yeah, so we assume like.
Okay.
And that doesn't need swing space, because they'd be refurbishing it without people in it.
Right.
Right, yeah. So,
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Chris Clarity. Thank you guys for everything you put together. My questions were, 1B seems more attractive because it gives us more future expansion space. 1A, couldn't that always get a second level also? Meaning then we avoid the elevator cost now? Or is that not?
Yes, that's a good question. You can put a second level on a one-story building if you plan ahead. The challenge that you run into is if we essentially create let's say, the structure to hold that second floor based on today's codes, if you then add that second story later and those codes have changed, we no longer can potentially support that second story. When that happens, you can do what's called an overbuild, which is essentially building an exoskeleton around the existing building to create that second story, but it's just an astronomical cost. So anything is possible. However, it's the least costly to kind of do a two-story right now and be able to expand that in the future that way, because then you don't run into those problems.
Good response, very good. The only other one I saw, I know everyone's trying to keep costs down, but I didn't love seeing new unit vents and running new piping and everything. I mean, can we look at, or did we look at doing ducted ERVs, something more of today's?
Priced it. There was an option that was a premium to upgrade the systems to a newer system. I don't know if they carried the price for it because it was more cost than what was proposed.
Let me scroll up.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think it's gonna get done. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be sorry. That'd be really bad. All right, this would be sending our kids to a different school. I think that was one of the options we included in the survey when we sent it out last year, and it got very negative response. So we have not pursued that option. Trust me, Alvin calls me a lot asking, because it would be a tremendous amount of revenue for them. But the sense we got from the survey that we sent out, and we got 1,000+ responses on that, is that people did not want to send their kids to a different facility. You lose a lot of control if you do that. I worked in districts that have those type of area agreements. There's pros and cons to them. But it seemed like this community did not want to pursue that. Could you construct a new building for quote? Yeah, this question I'm going to be asking this one.
I'm going to pass that down to Harvey.
We're gonna lose this if we go back to one of those.
Well, I can get back to it. So the poll will be down for just a moment. You want me to go back to the slide?
No.
Let Michelle know. Okay. All right, bear with us for just a second right here.
Thank you. Great. So question is, could you build a new building with option 1A and B? So I can't speak to the programmatic portions of it. Full disclosure, I am a licensed architect, but I just work for a construction company, so I won't put on my architect hat in this regard. Programmatically, you have to look at what a new school would be. So how many square feet that would be, what kind of space that would need, where's the real estate gonna be? So there's all sorts of questions about that. However, if you look at the cost per square foot, it's often related in this conversation about what things cost per square foot. You have to be very careful about what square feet you're comparing. So, for instance, a middle school has different programmatic needs than an elementary school, obviously, whether it be gym space or theater space or whatever it might be. So, with all that being said, if you were to look at an elementary school at $438 a square foot or $352 a square foot, we are budgeting we're actually under construction on 3 schools in the Hampshire School District right now. Those are somewhere in the tune of about $500 a square foot if you were to average it across those schools, between $500 and actually $600 a square foot. So to answer, the short answer to the question in this long description of what it is, in order we can get the parameters of why we're evaluating it this way is, you'd be hard pressed to build a new school for the cost that we're talking about renovating. That is just the construction cost. It has nothing to do with the design and real estate costs for being able to build a new school. So, no, you couldn't build a new school for the cost that we're talking about for 1A and 1B without some more deep evaluation of that. And we can do those budgeting exercises should we be asked to do so. But given the current state and understanding what our current projects are, Concord Middle School, which we're also working on, is actually $141 million construction cost. And that is close to $600 a square foot. So, construction. So that's just construction cost.
Sorry.
Yeah, you must go.
Scroll up.
I think there's extra costs, and some of this is factored in with some of the soft costs when it talks about, consolidating the schools or you're reconfiguring the schools, whatever the case may be. There are costs connected to that, and this is a good example. You have the tech ed classroom, we wouldn't be teaching tech ed if that's a 3 through 6 school, so you gotta change that from. Depending on the specific equipment in there, what you would need to seal off, so on and so forth, would vary some of the costs connected to that, right? So you would just have to price that out. Some of this stuff, like getting new furniture, for example, soft cost is not just furniture, it's actually a small piece of it, but some of that is factored in those soft costs, that if you're gonna change around and do some of these different spaces and utilize them differently, it's factored into the overall cost. We expect to get something on the ballot this March. It's going to be, I would assume, a very lengthy conversation at the board meeting Wednesday night. Since I've gotten here, my hope has been for something connected to GMS is to put something on the ballot in March 2026, which is this upcoming March. That's been my selfish goal, is to get a project on here. I was really hoping you would come back with like $12 million, and this would be a piece of cake. You just put it on there and pass and move on with life. But this is obviously a different conversation. So I'm anticipating us having a lengthy meeting at the board meeting on Wednesday. We have a very, very good board right now who's kept up to date on everything that we're doing, values, the financial aspects of the community and the town, as well as the educational aspects, and I'm confident in the decision they're going to make. We'll wait to get this sorted. This is the educator for me. Any new information is learned information, so I don't consider it a waste of time to go through this process right now if it gets voted down in March, if we can take things away from it, right? Everything's a learning experience, we learn from that. So I don't think it's a waste. Yes, we would probably retain these guys for longer, and that's going to cost more money and everything connected to that. But it could be money well spent if we get to the right solution for the community.
Christine Harrison, 95 Pinecrest Road. Of the three options, first I want to thank the committee and the school board and Steve Walker having these community forums and doing this education.
Can you speak into the microphone?
Sorry, I'm short.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you all for all the hard work and for putting forward these three options. Of them all, I think 1B makes the most sense. I like the idea of having not a sprawling ranch like we have now at GMS, and I felt like 1A made it more of a sprawling ranch, and just efficiency and fire safety and all of that. I think that's a really good option for our town. Because of the cost, and because I know that been here through the history of these projects and these proposals, I'd like to be more hopeful than I'm feeling right now, but I would also implore the board and the Capital Improvement Committee to look at what happens if this doesn't pass with a really serious eye. Like you, the 50s and 60s building has given me great pause, to put it lightly. And I think we need to start looking at stopgap. Unfortunately, stopgap solutions for moving students and staff out into the safer environment. If this weren't.
gonna do that phasing one, and then I'm gonna send it to you guys for why renovation costs are what they are. But can we look at the phasing approach for this? I think we're gonna look at everything, right? And I think that's part of the conversation that we're gonna have. If we look at this from different chunks, what do we absolutes that we have to have now, and what would the cost associated with that? Again, that's why we looked at trying to break down and maximize the information we could get from these guys over here with the three options that we presented here, the different costs of the different portions of it. If we're gonna address everything on the existing site first, what is the cost for that? Maybe we start that in phase one. If we're gonna start with a different aspect of it, say, you know, I don't know, you can start with an addition, I don't know why you would, but maybe you wanna start with the addition, what's the cost with that, and phase that part in. And then maybe you don't jump right to the site work, you know, redoing the fire lanes and doing the parking lots, maybe you wait for that, you know. So I think anything is on the table, that's why we wanna show everyone pricing and the options that we're at right there. Why renovation approaching the cost of the new building? I'm gonna say because my uneducated, and he's gonna give you the educated why, is because some parts of this building are essentially rebuilding because it's that rough.
This is an age-old question of any project. Is it cheaper to build new or renovate? And I can tell you in the close to 30 years I've been doing this, it's flip-flopped probably 17 times over that 30 years of which one's the most cost-effective way to do it. There's a portion of this project that by renovating, you're making what's there be up to today's standards. So there's an intrinsic cost in that, which then elevates the cost of the renovation closer to a new build. It's hard to say any given project, and as I said earlier, that we couldn't build a new building for the same price. It really comes down to what is needed in the existing structure, what is inherent in the existing structure that actually supports the renovation. There are portions of this building that work, that are stable. Let's utilize those, and that's where you get your savings on a renovation versus having to build a whole new structure and paying for the cost of the structure. So it really depends. Every project gets evaluated in this fashion. We weren't asked to price out the new build. As Lisa said, we did not go back to the new build that was not approved to reprice it. We certainly could. We'd be happy to do that on behalf of the community and get a sense of what that cost is. But it really does flip-flop, and I would say consistently over the past 3 to 5 years, new build and renovation do run neck and neck. And it's really about, are there things in a mid-century, put my architect hat on a little bit, we built great buildings at the beginning of the 1900s. We just renovated Salem Middle School. It was built in 1908. It's a great bones. We didn't do that in the mid-century. We put up buildings like you read about with no insulation, you know, just like we talked about. They're not worth, part of the discussion we had in Concord was the same thing. That school was built in the 50s and 60s. There's nothing of value there. There's something to be said that we put buildings up during that time in our history that solved the need, but didn't have a long-term goal in mind. And that's where I think you look at each of these components. That 1930s building is probably better built than the 1960s building, believe it or not. So those are all the things we can evaluate, but really right now I would say renovation and new build do run neck and neck on any given project.
Yeah, I think that latest one, it talks about that kind of phasing idea of looking at different parts and different sections of these options, figuring out what works for us as a community and for our district. And if that takes care of, different aspects of that take care of our initial needs here, you know, the safety and security of our kids, focusing on that first before we do anything else. Yep.
Another thing to consider in the phasing conversation, so time is money. Us as a construction manager being out here costs money, so the longer you have the project run for, the more costly it becomes as well. The other side of that is the longer you extend it, the more cost it's going to be in the escalation of construction costs. We typically see between 3 and 5% year over year. In the 5 years of the post-COVID pandemic, was 35%. So when you look at numbers like that, I don't have my crystal ball. It's in the shop getting fixed, but the reality is that there's no better time than to build. It is right and that's the reality of it, whether it's the right number or not. Waiting doesn't cost anything less.
If you had no students at GMS, how long would option 1B take? I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
That's a great question.
But I looked at your numbers, and you're
Less
roughly
Yeah.
at about $1 million per month.
Yeah, okay. So, so 27 months, right, you divide that up. Putting me on the spot right now, could we shave 6 months out of that? Maybe, but I don't know that that necessarily translates to $6 million. What it does translate to is speed to market and bidding, that there's some percentage points that you could gain, but I don't see $1 million per month savings by reducing it by a month. I would see some savings for
I'm
sure.
interested in getting it down to 12 months. COVID sucked, but we did do school from home for 1 year. And if you could keep the elementary school kids home for 1 year of remote schooling, it will suck. But if you could get that project done in 1 year.
I wouldn't say we get that project done in 1 year as far
You can't
as
do it.
square
Okay.
feet, but not a year. Is it less than 2? Yeah, but is it not 2 school years? I'm not,
I hope you're volunteering to babysit everyone's children while they're doing
I think with the Alvern option, when you enter into an area agreement with a high school, there's usually like a base pay. You pay per student based upon their tuition. So for example, our tuition rate in this district, if a student wants to attend here, is a little over $18,000, right? Now that's just a flat tuition rate, and each individual case is obviously different. If you're in a mass area agreement with a school, like we would be in this situation, it's not going to be $18,000, but it's still going to be well over 12, maybe approaching $15,000 per student. You're going to subtract transportation costs because the home district is still going to pay for that. So you might as well factor it into your math there, because now you're driving instead of Campbell over to Hudson to Alvern. Thankfully, that school's not too far away, but there will be additional costs associated with that. So just using rough numbers, if you use 15,000 as that 300 kids that you're sending over there, you might have some savings in CTE there to account for that. You're looking at, millions of dollars to send the kids to Alvern. And then they're not your kids anymore. So it's obvious anything is possible. Like I said, my first call I got after I got this job was from the principal at Auburn asking me to send all the Litchfield kids there, literally the day after I got the job. So I know they would take us. But it's not a cheap option per se for a district to enter an area agreement. And you lose all of your self-control over your education. You're at the mercy of the district you're sending your kids to. I mean, the schools that do it, right? My previous district had a small town that sent about, anywhere between 80 to 100 kids to the high school, right? And that worked for them rather than having a high school of that size. But, this would be probably one of the bigger area agreements if we were going to send our kids to Alvern over there.
Eli, again, I just wanted to offer a comment. I think that it would be helpful. We talked a little bit about the extra cost associated with waiting. And so I think in the interest of trying to force the issue come March, educating people on the fact that we're now going to end up spending more money renovating than we would have building a new building, and spending time educating people on how much more it's going to cost us to wait and continue to revisit the issue year after year. And then this is much harder to come by, but what's our doomsday scenario, which has been alluded to a bunch of times here? Like, what's the situation where we are in trouble, we don't have a place for these kids to be, the roof collapsed, or what have you, to give folks an idea of a sense of urgency that I don't necessarily think is present.
Yeah, I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer. I try to be a positive person in this role. I know I'm not like that, all 100% of the time, but I try to be positive. If the building was to collapse at GMS, we would be in a very significant financial hardship in this community. We're talking millions of dollars to replace it. You got to move the dispatch students up there. And we're not sitting on millions of dollars in reserves. And we're not sitting in millions of dollars of just like excess in our budget, right? We're in a default budget right now. We'll be okay. We're in a default budget. We're fine. We proposed a budget for next year that's approximately the same as this budget right now. we're not sitting in our reserves are capped off. None of them are over $400,000. There would only be one reserve we could even touch to do this type of work, and it's sitting in the 300s. That building was collapsed at GMS. I don't know what you're doing. You're not in a Claremont situation, but you're not in a good situation, right? You're asking the state for help. I don't know if they're gonna help you. So like, you don't want that catastrophic effort. We would figure it out, because you always figured it out the best that you can. But like, we gotta do something. We gotta do something at some point.
Linda Lassard. So I've heard a couple of people say if we need to get it out to the public, but we look at how many people are here for Community Forum number 3, and I was at Community Forum number 1, and it was less. I believe Community Forum number 2 was more than this. So I just wonder if people in the audience have ideas of how we can get this out to more people, because I feel like people that are in this room have tried and have done all that. So how do we get this out to more of the public to be educated on everything that we're doing?
Everybody comes up for a parade.
Good point.
Get the tractor and an ice cream truck.
All right, I'll address the ones up here. So the question is, are there estimates for the energy/maintenance cost savings that will result from different plan options? Not at this time, but we can look at essentially what it would be to run these buildings in comparison to what it is today. So that would be forthcoming as we start to kind of narrow that down.
All right, I'm gonna see if there's any, because I see some people leaving and I can't see the clock, but I'm gonna guess we're over. All right, not surprised. So any last final questions, either up here on the board or at the mic? I'll wait for a pause here.
I'll go ahead and speak again, and it's about the community engagement and the cost again. And back in '24, this was shortly after I had moved to this town, and I did get the booklet, and I did read through it. So there was information that was sent out about the proposed new building for GMS. And I don't think I actually voted on it because I was too new to the town, and I had just seen the paperwork, and that was that. I assume more paperwork will get sent out again. Will it actually make a difference? Probably not. When most people show up to vote, they're going to see yes, no, and dollar price and future tax burden. And they're going to make their decision strictly based off that information. And so that is why I have put my foot down on the cost emphasis so hard. Thank you.
I don't. Any other questions? Excellent. So, you want me just to do it? I have the mic. All right.
Go for it.
So, we're obviously going to digest this conversation. Thank you for making this actually very pleasant. I was very nervous about this evening. As you may have picked up, not knowing how this was going to go, knowing what those numbers that were going up there. But I just want to thank everyone for being respectful, asking some excellent questions, and being involved in this process. That's all we ask for, is just involvement in the process and trying to look at it in a positive light, that we all actually do have the same goal, and it's figuring out the right long-term solution for this community, for the education of their students. We may disagree on how we get there, but we all, I think, have that goal in mind. So we're going to digest this feedback from this evening. Do we have a committee meeting this week or next week? We have a board meeting, first of all. We have a board meeting Wednesday where this will be a discussion topic, obviously. And the board's going to talk about what they heard tonight and the information from Harriman and from Harvey, and start figuring out how we're going to move forward, specifically in regards to the March ballot. And any warrant articles we choose or not choose to add on there. And then continue our work with our kind of facilities committee that we've had working on this, that has different representatives on it from the community, to make sure that we continue to work with this group to kind of figure out the different solutions that could work for us, and then kind of outline that path. I don't know if Community Forum 4 is going to happen. I think it's dependent on some other actions that are going to happen here. We had mapped out to here to see where we're going to get. If we elect to do something on the March ballot, I would expect us to have more opportunities to engage with the public, to share different plans, to share different ideas, whatever the case may be. Even if we don't, we're going to continue to share information and tell everyone where we are in this process and try and be as transparent as possible about what we're looking at a district for GMS. So that's our kind of next steps. I want to thank you again for attending tonight. Feel free to email me, excuse me, any questions that you may have about this. If you didn't feel comfortable putting it up there or coming to the mic, I completely understand. Please feel free to reach out to me, or if there's someone else in your life, they can reach out to me. I'll do my best to answer myself or get the answer for you. So thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful night.